I'll never forget the American student in Berlin who tried to pay his university tuition with a credit card and had a complete meltdown when they told him the semester fee was 312 euros. He accused the registrar of leaving off zeros, pulled up his student loan website to show them what real tuition looks like, demanded to speak to the billing department's supervisor, because clearly there had been a catastrophic computer error. The registrar just kept sliding the invoice back across the desk, saying 9. Das stimmt. No, that's correct. He refused to pay for 3 weeks because he was convinced it was a phishing scam. Meanwhile, at a Munich pharmacy, an American tourist tried to buy insulin without a prescription and couldn't understand why the pharmacist needed to see one. She explained that back home she pays $340 per vial out of pocket. The pharmacist looked physically pained and said, "Here, it's 35 euros with prescription." Fully covered by insurance? The American stared at her, then whispered, "Are you telling me my government is running a protection racket?" The pharmacist just nodded slowly and said, "I cannot comment on American healthcare policy, but perhaps yes." Then there was the guy in Hamburg who went to the ER with a sprained ankle, received x-rays, a wrap, crutches, and pain medication, then sat in the waiting room for 4 hours expecting someone to bring him a bill. Finally approached the desk and asked when the financial counselor would discuss payment plans. They handed him a 15 euros parking validation ticket. He thought it was a down payment. Let me tell you what happens when Americans encounter European systems that don't treat basic necessities as premium luxury goods. My favorite is the American in Vienna who went to register at the city office required for all residents and was told he needed to bring a passport, proof of address, and a passport photo. He showed up with a 47-page document portfolio, including his birth certificate, social security card, 3 bank statements, 2 character references, his high school diploma, and a notarized letter from his landlord. The clerk looked at his folder and said, "I need 1 photo and 1 paper showing your address." He insisted she look through everything because I know how bureaucracy works. Always need the thing you don't bring. Kept trying to return his documents. He kept pushing them back, saying, "Just process it all now so we don't have to do this twice." The registration took 6 minutes. He was furious it was so fast, convinced he'd done it wrong. Came back the next day to verify it was really in the system. They showed him his registered address. He asked, "But when does the real registration happen?" They explained this was the real registration. He demanded to know when he'd receive his registration confirmation package in the mail with all the legal documents. "You just get a letter confirming your address." He stood there deflated and said, "I prepared for this for 3 weeks. The clerk replied, "Yes. We could tell from your binder. Then there's the American in Copenhagen who tried to open a bank account and brought 2 forms of ID, 3 proof photo address documents, his employment contract, tax returns from the last 3 years, and a list of references. The bank employee said, "We just need your CPR number and passport." He stared at her like she'd asked him to rob the place. "That's it? No credit check? No minimum deposit? No account maintenance fees?" She said, "Correct." He leaned in and whispered, "What's the catch? Is this a front for something?" She looked confused. He said, "Banks don't just give people accounts. What are you really selling?" She replied, "Banking services." He walked out shaking his head, convinced it was a money laundering operation. My absolute favorite was the American in Stockholm, who needed to see a doctor for a routine checkup. Booked an appointment at a Verticentral local health clinic, showed up 30 minutes early with his passport, insurance cards from America just in case, his complete medical history printed out, and a credit card ready. The receptionist asked for his person number, his Swedish ID number. He didn't have one yet because he'd just moved. She said, "Okay, just pay the visitor fee, 250 kronor. That's about $23. He said, "That's the copay, right? What's the actual appointment cost?" She said, "That's the entire cost." He laughed nervously. "For what? Just to see the nurse?" She replied, "No. To see the doctor, get examined, receive any prescriptions." He pulled out his phone and started Googling Sweden medical scam in the waiting room. Refused to go in for his appointment because nothing costs $23 in healthcare. Eventually left without being seen, convinced it was an organ harvesting scheme. I watched an American family in Ljubljana, Slovenia completely lose their minds over playground equipment. They were at a public park, completely free, well-maintained, huge play structures. The mother kept walking around looking for the entrance gate or ticket booth. Finally asked the local parent, "Where do we pay?" The Slovenian woman looked confused. "Pay for what?" The American said, "To use the playground." A long silence. The Slovenian said, "It's a public park. It's free." The American's face did something incredible. "Free? Like free free? How is it maintained?" The local said, "Taxes." The American whispered to her husband, "This is socialism," like she was identifying a disease. They used the playground, but the mom kept taking photos of her kids there and saying, this would cost $400 a year for a membership at home. Then there was the American student in Prague who had a complete crisis over public transportation. Bought a monthly pass for the entire city metro, trams, buses, everything, for about 550 crowns, roughly $25. Brought it back to the ticket office the next day, claiming they'd given him the wrong pass. This says unlimited travel. "I need the actual unlimited pass," the worker said. "That is the actual unlimited pass," he said, for $25. "That's impossible." "What's the catch? Does it only work during certain hours? Only on specific lines? Do I have to show ID every time?" She said, "No catch. It works 24/7 on all public transport." He stood there doing mental math, then said, "My monthly parking pass at home is $180, and I still have to pay for gas." She replied, "Yes, we know. That's why we built this system." He walked away looking like he'd just learned his whole life was a scam. The absolute best was the American in Tallinn, Estonia, who tried to visit a public library. Walked in, looked around at people using computers, checking out books, sitting in comfortable reading areas. Asked the librarian, "What's the membership fee?" She said, "Free for residents. Small fee for non-residents, €2 per month." He blinked. "Per month? For what?" She said, "Full library access, books, computers, Wi-Fi, printing, study rooms, events." He said, "No, I mean, what does that to euros get me? Like a trial membership." She said, "No, that's full access." He pulled out his phone and showed her his public library membership fees from his American cities, $0 for basic access, but $10 per hour for computer use, 50 cents per page to print, $1.50 per year for premium access to new books. She looked at his screen for a long time and finally said, "I'm sorry your country does this to you." He just nodded sadly and whispered, "Me too. But nothing nothing compares to the American in Oslo, who took his kid to the emergency room for a bad ear infection. They waited about 45 minutes, saw a doctor, got examined, received antibiotics, got a follow-up appointment scheduled, and were told they could leave. The American kept sitting there. Nurse came back and asked if everything was okay. He said, "We're waiting for the bill." She said, "There's no bill. You're tourists, so there's a small fee, about 200 kroner. That's roughly $18. He stared at her. "For the visit?" She said, "Yes." He said, "Just the ER visit? Not including the doctor?" She said, "Including everything, the visit, examination, and prescription." He pulled out his phone and showed her a photo of a hospital bill from his last. A visit in America, $2,847 for a sprained wrist. Just to be seen, not including treatment. The nurse looked at it, looked at him, looked back at the bill, and said quietly, "I think you should consider moving here." He laughed like it was a joke. She wasn't smiling. She said, "I'm serious. We have good schools too. Also free." He sat there in the waiting room for another 20 minutes, just processing that information, while his kid played with the free toys in the children's corner. Later, the nurse told me he came back the next day and asked her how Norwegian citizenship worked. She gave him a pamphlet. He's apparently still there. 3 years later, working in tech and posting videos about Norwegian healthcare with captions like, "I had surgery and the parking costs more than the procedure." Here's the thing about Americans encountering European public services. We've been so thoroughly convinced that basic social goods must cost a fortune that we literally cannot process. When they don't, we think affordable healthcare is a scam. Accessible education is suspicious, and functional public transportation is witchcraft. Maybe the real culture shock isn't Europe being different. It's finally seeing what our own system has been doing to us all along. But hey, at least our emergency room waiting rooms have really nice billing offices. That's something, right?